I wasn't afraid to live. That's the part people misunderstand. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't frozen. I wasn't broken. I was waiting. Waiting to become the right version of myself. The version that was confident enough. Ready enough. Whole enough. I believed that life should begin after you figure yourself out. So I prepared. I improved. I reflected. I worked on myself. And while I was working, life passed quietly beside me. At first, waiting felt responsible. Why rush into things before you're ready? Why make decisions from a place of uncertainty? Why start something important while still unfinished? Those thoughts sounded wise. They sounded like maturity. I told myself I was investing in the future. But investment only matters if the future arrives while you're still there to meet it. I didn't notice the problem right away. Waiting didn't feel empty. It felt productive. I read. I learned. I analyzed myself endlessly. I became very good at understanding why I wasn't ready yet. There was always a reason. I need more confidence. I need more stability. I need more clarity. I need to fix this part of myself first. The list never ended. Every improvement revealed another flaw. Every answer created a new question. I mistook self-awareness for progress. Years passed like that. Quietly. I watched others make imperfect choices. Start things they weren't ready for. Commit before they had certainty. Some failed. Some succeeded. All of them lived. I stayed back, convinced my time would come once I felt complete. I didn't feel envy. I felt superiority. I told myself they were reckless. That they would pay for their impatience later. That I was doing it the right way. But the right way kept postponing itself. There was a moment, subtle, easy to ignore, when I felt the first crack. Someone asked me a simple question, "So what are you doing with your life right now?" I answered smoothly. Explained my plans. My process. My preparation. They nodded. And then asked, "When does it start?" I laughed it off. Soon. That word followed me home. Soon. It sounded harmless. But the longer I sat with it, the heavier it became. I realized I had been saying, soon, for years. Soon after I improve this. Soon after I understand that. Soon after I become more like the person I'm supposed to be. I had turned my life into a waiting room. And I was both the patient and the doctor, constantly diagnosing, never discharging. I started paying attention to how often I declined opportunities. Not because I didn't want them, but because I didn't feel ready for them. Ready had become my gatekeeper. And ready never opened the door. I noticed how much energy I spent imagining the future instead of inhabiting the present. The future version of me was always better. More confident. More capable. More deserving. The current me was just temporary. A draft. I treated myself like something unfinished, and therefore unworthy of fully living yet. That realization unsettled me. Because drafts don't get to experience life. They only prepare for it. I began to sense a quiet grief forming. Not grief for something lost. Grief for something never entered. I wasn't mourning a mistake. I was mourning a delay. And delays don't feel dangerous until you realize time doesn't pause with you. Life doesn't wait for your self-improvement arc to finish. It keeps moving. I had believed becoming ready was an act of care. I hadn't considered that it might be an act of avoidance. Avoidance of risk. Of exposure. Of being seen before I felt complete. I realized something uncomfortable. The right version of me was always just ahead, close enough to imagine, far enough to never arrive. And as long as I waited for that version, the real one, the only one that could actually live, remained on hold. I didn't feel panic yet. Just a growing unease. A sense that if I kept waiting for the perfect moment to begin, I might eventually wake up and realize that beginning was no longer possible. That was the thought that stayed with me. Not loud. Persistent. How much life can you postpone before it stops being available at all? Once the idea settled that waiting might be costing me something, I tried to dismiss it. Not everything that feels uncomfortable is true. Not every doubt deserves attention. That's what I told myself. I went back to improving. Refining. Correcting. I doubled down on preparation, convinced that the unease meant I simply hadn't finished yet. But the unease didn't go away. It sharpened. I began to notice time in a way I never had before. Not dramatically, practically. Birthdays arrived faster. Years collapsed into each other. Milestones happened to other people while I watched from a careful distance. I still didn't feel old. That was the problem. I felt unfinished. And unfinished things feel like they have all the time in the world. I started seeing patterns I had ignored for years. How often I said, "after I'm ready," instead of "now." How frequently I postponed decisions that carried emotional risk. How instinctively I reached for self-improvement instead of action. Self-improvement had become my hiding place. If I was always working on myself, I never had to test myself. That distinction mattered. I noticed how often my plans were abstract. I spoke in intentions, not timelines. In directions, not commitments. I told people what I would do, not what I was doing. Those statements felt safe. They preserved possibility without requiring movement. But possibility without action doesn't expand. It decays. There was a moment, small, ordinary, that forced me to see this clearly. I ran into someone I hadn't seen in years. We talked politely. Exchanged updates. They told me about something they had started back when we last spoke, something uncertain, imperfect, risky. They hadn't known if it would work. It hadn't worked perfectly. But it had changed them. They asked me what I had been doing in the same time. I gave an honest answer. I've been working on myself. The words hung in the air longer than I expected. Not because they were wrong, but because they were incomplete. Working on myself for what? That question echoed after we parted. I realized then that my waiting no longer had a destination. It had become a lifestyle. I wasn't preparing for a specific beginning. I was postponing beginnings in general. That realization landed heavily. Because beginnings don't wait forever. Some experiences have windows. They require a certain age. A certain energy. A certain willingness to be unpolished. Those windows close quietly. Not with drama, with irrelevance. I felt a surge of grief then. Not for mistakes made. For chances declined without knowing they were finite. I had assumed readiness would protect me from regret. Instead, it had created a new kind. Regret for not participating while I still could. I began to understand that becoming ready was an illusion of control. It suggested that one day I would feel immune to doubt. But doubt isn't something you outgrow. It's something you learn to move with. I had been waiting to eliminate it. That day never came. And the longer I waited, the more fragile I felt at the idea of starting anything. Readiness hadn't strengthened me. It had kept me inexperienced. I realized something deeply unsettling. The version of me I was waiting for didn't exist. Not because it was impossible, but because versions of yourself are created through action, not preparation. You don't become confident before you act. You become confident because you act. I had reversed the order. And in doing so, I had placed my entire life behind a condition that could never be met. That understanding triggered a quiet panic. Not the kind that makes you run, the kind that makes you still. I saw how easily I could keep going like this. Another year of preparation. Another refinement. Another delay that felt reasonable. Nothing would stop me. That was the danger. Waiting doesn't demand an ending. It just keeps extending itself. I imagined myself years later, still explaining why I wasn't ready yet. Still intelligent. Still insightful. Still waiting. That image frightened me more than failure ever had. Failure would at least mean I tried. Waiting meant I never entered. I finally understood the real cost of waiting. It wasn't missed success. It was missed experience. I hadn't failed at life. I had deferred it. And deferral, repeated long enough, becomes disappearance. Not visible disappearance. Internal. I felt a moral tension rise then. If I continued waiting, I would preserve the illusion that I was in control. If I stopped waiting, I would have to accept uncertainty, imperfection, and exposure. Both options were uncomfortable. But only one involved living in the present instead of a hypothetical future. I didn't yet know how to stop waiting. Habits that feel responsible are the hardest to abandon. But I knew one thing with certainty that cut through all the analysis. If I waited any longer for the right version of myself to arrive, I might eventually realize that the time I was saving was the only time I ever actually had. The moment I stopped waiting didn't feel like bravery. It felt like grief. Grief for the time I had treated as refundable. For the experiences I had postponed until they quietly expired. For the life I believed would begin once I became someone else. I didn't wake up one morning suddenly ready. I woke up tired of deferring my own presence. That was the shift. I realized that the right version of me had become a moving target. Every improvement moved it further away. Every insight created a new prerequisite. I wasn't becoming ready. I was becoming excellent at delay. So I did something that went against everything I had practiced. I entered life unfinished. I made a choice without certainty. Started something without confidence. Spoke without rehearsing the outcome. My hands shook. My mind searched for exits. Every instinct screamed that this was premature. That I should wait just a little longer. But waiting had lost its authority. Not because it was wrong, but because it had taken too much. The first days felt raw. I noticed how exposed I felt without the shield of preparation. How imperfect my actions were. How visible my doubts became. I wasn't impressive. I was present. And presence changed the texture of time. Days stopped blending together. Moments left marks. Consequences appeared, good and bad. I had forgotten what that felt like. Waiting had flattened everything into theory. Action reintroduced reality. Some things didn't work. Some attempts were awkward. Some choices led nowhere. And yet, something fundamental shifted. I felt anchored. Not confident, grounded. I learned that readiness is not a prerequisite for living. It's a byproduct. You don't step into life once you're whole. You become whole by stepping in. I had spent years trying to assemble myself in isolation. But identity doesn't form in the waiting room. It forms in motion. I started noticing how my inner dialogue changed. I stopped asking, "Am I ready for this?" And started asking, "Am I willing to be changed by this?" That question felt honest. Because life isn't something you complete once you're prepared. It's something that prepares you as you go. I mourned the years I lost to preparation. Not dramatically. Honestly. I allowed myself to feel regret without turning it into self-punishment. Those years weren't wasted. They taught me clarity. Introspection. Patience. But they also taught me the danger of postponement. I stopped trying to redeem the past by explaining it. I integrated it by acting differently. There's a quiet freedom in accepting that you will never feel fully ready. That certainty is not the starting line. It's a story we tell ourselves to feel safe. Life doesn't reward readiness. It responds to participation. If you're listening to this and something resonates, hear this clearly. You are not behind because you're unfinished. You're behind only if you keep waiting for permission to begin. The version of you you're waiting for is not ahead of you. It's created by the choices you keep postponing. I didn't find myself. I entered myself. Messy. Uncertain. Imperfect. And in doing so, I learned something essential. Time is not something you save by waiting. It's something you spend by living. I waited for the right version of me for a long time. And I lost time I will never get back. But the moment I stopped waiting, stopped treating life as something that begins after preparation, my life didn't suddenly make sense. It became real. And real life, even when it's uncomfortable, is the only place where meaning actually grows. I'm not the person I was waiting to become. I'm the person who finally showed up. And that, unfinished, uncertain, present, is enough.